Good evening, friends of Egerton Ryerson, acquaintances, ladies and gentlemen, here at the Citadel on Parliament Street in Toronto, and virtually by Zoom in many places. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional territory of many Indigenous peoples, most notably the Mississaugas of the Credit, with whom Ryerson himself lived, learned their language, made lasting friendships, and whom he supported in their various struggles, where he was named a brother by an Ojibwe chief and given an Ojibwe name Chichok, which means bird on a wing. We are delighted to have Patrice Dutil as our speaker tonight. You may know Patrice as Professor of Political Science and Public Administration at TMU, and certainly someone who knows about Ryerson and is published on Ryerson with Ron Stagg, who will be commenting after Patrice's talk. Ron is a Professor Emeritus of History, Canadian History at TMU. So, without further ado, let me turn it over to Patrice Dutil, Egerton Ryerson as a humanist.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome, and thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. So my talk tonight is a slightly different perspective on Egerton Ryerson. I want to bring out another dimension of his work, set it a little bit into the historical context and into the historiographical context. There are waves in Ryerson studies, if we can call them that. For a long time, he was considered to be predominantly a religious man, a religious thinker. There was a moment 20 years ago when he was increasingly portrayed as a liberal thinker. And I want to strike a different pose. I want to present him as a humanist, not quite a liberal. That I think is going a bit too far. But I want to show something slightly different. And I want to start with a scene. Picture this. London, England, late July, 1855. Egerton Ryerson, his daughter Sophia, is meeting with John Beverley Robinson and Captain John Henry Lefroy in London. What's happening in 1855? Well, the world is well into the Crimean War. Captain Lefroy is actually corresponding with Florence Nightingale. Indeed. John Beverley Robinson is on holidays. He does that a lot. And Egerton Ryerson and his daughter are there to launch a visit to the continent. And they're having a discussion. Who are these people? Why are they there? This, by the way, is just an internet picture. It's not an actual picture of Egerton Ryerson, just very cleverly selected by yours truly. Click. John Lefroy, Captain John Lefroy, is actually a remarkable man. He was a Royal Artilleryman in the British Army. He's a scientist. He's sent to the observatory at St. Helena Island, and then is sent to Canada to conduct a survey, a magnetic and meteorological survey of British North America. He'll be setting up 300 stations, taking data. He'll travel 5,000 miles and he'll reach the Arctic Circle. And he's captured in a magnificent painting by Paul Kane. That's him, John Lefroy. Captured in the mid-1840s by Paul Kane, an artist whose painting was sold 25 years ago for $2 million. Click. We know John Lefroy because he set up the observatory at the University of Toronto. That was his doing. He was part of a British initiative to better understand the physical realities of the North American continent. He was a man who had tremendous contacts in the British government, was considered to be a serious scientist, a military man, and a very influential man. While he is in Toronto, he befriends Egerton Ryerson. He also marries Emily Robinson. She'll be So therefore, he will be the son-in-law of the judge. He'll return to London in 1853, and therefore he's available to meet with Egerton Ryerson in 1855. Also around the table, click, John Beverley Robinson. John Beverley Robinson would probably not need an introduction, but in previous times, but it is important to introduce him today because I think he's been completely forgotten. This is son of a loyalist. John Beverley Robinson was the family compact, arguably the most dominant pillar of the family compact. Fought with Brock at Queenston Heights, was named Attorney General in 1813. In 1819, will unilaterally declare all blacks of Ontario free, a bold move. He's elected to the Parliament of Upper Canada the following year. He's made Justice of the Court of King's Bench, so the highest ranking officer of the court, and unfortunately pressed for the execution of Samuel Lount and Peter Mitchell. I'll hold that against him for a long time. John Beverley Robinson is the father-in-law of John Lefroy. Click. Robinson was a man of wealth, and his home was a place of erudition. He had an enormous library. It was a very artistic home. He appreciated art. He appreciated the fine things in life. He could afford it. He could afford to go to London and spend the sticky months of summer there, but he'd spend more time than that. Ironically, that beautiful home, eventually, just to tell you the story how things get linked up, that home on Queen Street West was demolished, click, and in its place, the Methodist Publishing Company was built. So Egerton Ryerson got his revenge, and we know that building today because it's the City TV building on Queen Street. So things go full circle, and we know things. So there's a tie there to John Beverley Robinson, and there's a tie to Lefroy, and it's artistic. Click. So what's Egerton Ryerson and his daughter Sophia doing in London in 1855? Well, they're going to be on a mission. The kind of mission that people who knew Egerton Ryerson would not be surprised about. They're on the hunt for scientific equipment. They're on the hunt for props, globes, microscopes, telescopes, thermometers, all sorts of things that will be helpful to teaching in the province. But in that conversation between Lefroy, Ryerson, and Robinson, a topic comes up. Click. You need to seek objects of taste, Egerton. You need to go beyond scientific globes. You need to go beyond microscopes and telescopes and things like that. You need to develop, to help Ontario, Canada West, develop a taste for the finer things of life, for artistic realities, for new discoveries. Who are they asking? Click. Egerton Ryerson. Why would he be the guy to undertake this kind of thing? Well, they know Ryerson. They've been in society together. Egerton Ryerson is very familiar with people in power in Canada West. He is a man of enormous power. He is a superintendent of education. He has been at this point for almost a decade. He was the president of Victoria College for the last 4 years. He was exhausted. And needed time away from the province. He wanted to travel, bring his daughter, and it launches Ryerson on an incredible voyage of discovery. His mission is to gather props, but now art. And Ryerson was a good candidate for that kind of thing because Lefroy and Robinson knew him as a man of culture, as a humanist. What do I mean by a humanist? Click. A person who is deeply interested in understanding the thought of man, the culture of man, in as many dimensions as possible. A person who is a humanist is interested in the reason of man, the evolution of man's reason, their culture, their experience, their knowledge. A humanist is empathetic. They want to understand their fellow man. They want to grow out of preconceived notions. A humanist is a multiculturalist, somebody who is at ease in a number of different cultures, somebody who speaks more than one language and who's interested in understanding other languages. A humanist is open to new ideas, to new perceptions, to new worlds. Ryerson had been to Europe many times. He'll come back to Europe many times. The world of Canada West is small for him. He was born here, but it's too small for him. And he has this passion to share his knowledge, to share his enthusiasm for his fellow man. Click. And that's what makes him a humanist. Briefly, I want to go over his biography. We know he was born in Charlottesville in 1803. He's the son of a loyalist, somebody who came from the United States, confident that his future belonged in British North America and not in revolutionary America, in revolutionary United States. He joins the Methodist Episcopal Church. He becomes a missionary at age 17. He's sent to the Mississauga of Credit River, and he raises money for a mixed school there. He learns the language, as Lynn said. He learns Ojibwe. He speaks the language. He marries Hannah Aikman in 1828, right after he's been ordained minister. He's made the editor of the Christian Guardian. He's barely 26 years old. And this is an important newspaper. He founds it. He doesn't just get moved into the job. He founds it, and it will quickly develop a following because it's a good newspaper. Egerton Ryerson is a missionary who speaks English and speaks Ojibwe. He's also a formidable editor. That makes him remarkable. Hannah died. He married Mary Armstrong a year and a half later. In 1833, he goes to the United Kingdom in order to unify the Methodists and the Wesleyans. And the following year, travels to London again to get a charter for Upper Canada Academy because he's been put in charge of throwing down the foundations of this new school that would likely challenge the University of Toronto. Upper Canada Academy would be established at Cobourg. Click. Egerton Ryerson was the founding principal. He goes back to London a few years later to lobby the Crown, to lobby the court, to get protections for Indigenous people from British expansions in Ontario, because there are illegal land occupations, and Ryerson wants to defend the Indigenous people. In 1837, he gets involved in the Aborigines Protection Society, an international movement designed to counter the imperialist thrust of the British Empire and the French Empire and everybody else. In 1838, he will advocate in favor of Peter Jones's petition to the Crown. I'm not going to say it. Can you say it, Gordon?
To cure quantity.
There you go. I don't want to embarrass myself or embarrass Peter Jones. Again, to convince London that the Mississaugas have a legal right to their lands. In 1839, he'll be, as I said earlier, appointed principal of Upper Canada Academy. It's upgraded to a college in 1841. He's only 36 years old. So already at age 36, Egerton Ryerson has occupied a number of very important functions in Canada West. Click. And it's not some small pokey thing. Victoria College in Coburg, and that's still the building today, is an imposing institution. It's a serious institution. It becomes Victoria College at the University of Toronto a few years later. It will move to the University of Toronto, and it still exists today. Click. In recognition of his efforts, in recognition of his great intellectual generosity, because he's writing, he's teaching, he's sharing, he's probing, he's pushing society to move along progressive lines. He's recognized with an honorary doctorate from Wesleyan University in Connecticut. And at age 41, 2 years later, he is recognized again for his great humanity, for his great managerial abilities, and he's named Superintendent of Education for Upper Canada. Click. He negotiates, he's also a very clever bureaucrat. He negotiates a deal with the British government to undertake a trip to Europe this time, not to Britain, but to Europe. And he will travel for almost a year. He will travel to England, parts of England, Scotland, Ireland, Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, Prussia, Bavaria, Italy, and France. He'll be bowled over by what he sees in France. As I said, a humanist who's interested in his fellow man, he discovers that La Sorbonne, Paris, University of Paris, is open. He attends lectures. He devotes himself to understanding French. He develops an understanding and an ability to speak French. It'll come in handy because he'll wind up in Rome and he gets to meet the Pope. And the Pope doesn't speak English and Ryerson doesn't speak Italian, but they both understand each other speaking French. This trip is paid for by the British Crown, and his mission is to discover what are the best methods of teaching. He's been given a particular mandate to be the superintendent of education. And the British Crown says, and he said, okay, I'll do that, but I need to know where the best practices are. A really classic, first-rate bureaucrat. Where are the best practices? And so he says, I need to go to these places in Europe, pay for my ticket. And the British government did. He sees all sorts of remarkable things. It's in his autobiography. It's in the letters that he writes. He'll stand in the pulpit of Martin Luther, a remarkable, he is a Protestant. He'll visit Mount Vesuvius. He'll go to the top of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, and he'll write about what an amazing sight to see Paris from that angle. It's a remarkable thing. In his conversations with teachers, with directors of education, he gathers new insights. He discovers that if you really want to have a good system, it has to be centralized. It can't be in the American style completely decentralized. It has to be centralized. There has to be a commanding intelligence to guide the system so that there is a more uniform outcome in terms of educational achievements. You can't just leave it to local authorities to make a determination of what will be an Ontarian, a Canada Wester. He also learns that you can teach how to teach. He marvels at the teachers in Scotland, teachers in Ireland. He offers a memorable description of a teacher in Prussia who, using a blackboard, gets the students to talk about geography because they were teaching geography in Prussia in the mid-1840s. And he found that remarkable. This teacher could apparently draw like an angel. And he had the kids identifying the various rivers and mountains and towns. And Ryerson thought that was just amazing. Certainly not what was happening in Canada West. He made he made an inventory of the things that he saw. And it occurred to him that, as in Europe, there should be a normal school. The idea is planted that teachers can be taught how to teach better, that there are techniques. Click. So it's an impressive tour. Again, paid for by the Crown. It's not him paying for it. And he took full advantage of it. He comes back to Ontario, and it's changing rapidly. It's changing rapidly. It's an important part of the context. There are all sorts of migrations coming, wave after wave after wave. Scots, French Canadians moving into Eastern Ontario. There are still Americans moving up north. And of course, this being the 1840s, you have the first migrations of the Irish escaping the famine and winding up on the shores of Lake Ontario. He's really impressed with the Irish method of teaching, by the way. The idea that you can have a reader. Everybody has the same reader. Everybody reads the same thing. He likes that idea very much, and he'll bring it. Toronto rapidly becomes the Belfast of North America, divided between Catholic and Protestant. He is conscious of that. He's conscious of the divisions. He's very concerned about the divisions. He's also aware, deeply aware, that there is an Indigenous population, but it is less than 1% of the population of Ontario. It is infinitesimally small. There are 97,000 students in Ontario by 1871. I use 1871 because it's roughly the midpoint of a superintendency. There are 2,600 schools in Canada West at that point. Click. He comes back from Europe and he writes his report. The report on a system of public elementary instruction for Upper Canada. And I think his thoughts in that work need to be appreciated for the humanistic instincts that it demonstrates. He calls for a humanistic approach aimed at a humanizing result. This is a high-ranking authority in the Methodist Church, but he is not interested in proselytizing. That is not his goal. He wants an education that is relevant, that is enlightening, that will prepare children for the future. He wants a cultivation of all our mental, moral, and physical powers. He loves the idea of music, of teaching students to do music. Singing. There are no instruments. Singing. And he says, religious songs are good, but also public. The songs from what he called the public sanctuary. They're not just the religious, but the public sanctuary. To teach kids about culture, about a culture that they may not know. He teaches them, he wants storytelling. He wants science. He wants art. This is what he gathered in his European trip. This is what he wants for Ontario. He doesn't want a dry, rote education. He wants kids to have their brains opened up, make them aware of the humanity around them. That's his objective. Click. I'm going to give you a few quotes here about what he wants, why he wants an education of the head, of the heart, of the hands. That's his objective. This is what he learned. This is what he wants. And he makes the point that every kid deserves an education. No matter where they come from, no matter who they are. He's deeply influenced by Johann Pestalozzi, the Swiss theoretical educator, Friedrich Froebel, who invented kindergarten, German kindergarten. He wants education for everyone. He says it's easy to justify because you will have a better economy, you will have a better patriotism, a better sense of what it is to be a Canadian. He actually talks about being a Canadian and about educating kids to be Canadians. And again, that word, humanity. Humanity comes back. Click. he is deeply concerned with educating children to communicate. Again, this is a man who learned Ojibwe for missionary purposes, spoke English, spoke Latin, understood, I think he understood ancient Greek because he talks about it a lot, and of course French. Why? Because you need to speak, you need to communicate. Words matter. For Egerton Ryerson, you need to train children to be at ease in public and in the private, to talk about things, to express themselves, to be open to the expression of other ideas from other children. Knowledge itself cannot properly be said to be power without the appropriate power to communicate it. Knowledge, even with poverty, is preferable to riches with ignorance. It's a gift that must be shared. It's a gift that must be offered to children, even those who don't want it. He'll say something to that effect. Click. So communication is clearly important. By education, I mean not the mere acquisition of certain arts or of certain branches of knowledge, but that instruction and discipline which qualify and dispose the subject of it for their appropriate duties and employments to life as Christians, of course, but a person of business and also as members of the civil community in which they live. Fundamentally, it's about learning to live in society, to learn to tolerate, to learn to accept, to learn the discipline of learning, to be open to learning. That's his ambition. And again, let's not forget that we are dealing with the 1840s. This is 20 years before the American Civil War. This is 7 years before the first railway connecting Toronto to Orillia. This is a deeply agricultural, rather impoverished community. But his dreams are of Europe. Click. Why should the farmer be destitute, of the nobility of knowledge? Why should the mechanic be a mere operative at his bench, when by the power of his country's intellectual wealth, he might equally contribute to his country's intellectual health and civic advancement? It's not about religion. It's emphatically not about religion. It's about creating a better community, a better brotherhood. In 1871, he finally has his wish, and the province will legislate compulsory attendance in free elementary schools. Click. So in sum, it's clear that Ryerson's priorities for an educational system were consistent. First of all, he wanted kids in class. He wanted the kids to have access to books and equipment. He wanted the school system to be dependent on funding, and that meant taxing people. People did not want to pay taxes in those days. Surprise, surprise. Why should we pay for my neighbor's students, my students' kids, my neighbor's students' kids? I don't have kids. My kids have grown up. No. Education is a requirement for the good of society. Therefore, we need to raise taxes. Getting better teachers, setting better standards, producing knowledge. Those are the values of Egerton Ryerson. Click. This all comes together in 1846. 1846, we don't even have responsible government. We're starting to have responsible government. Egerton Ryerson, a pillar of the family compact, a man who's quite at ease with the power structure, gets along more or less with John Strawn, Bishop Strawn, but is a friend of Robinson, is a friend of Lefroy. He's a friend of the people who move things in Canada West. He gets agreement in 1846, the Common School Act is passed. There's going to be a centralized public school system. The standards will be set in Toronto, but spread through the province. You're going to set up school taxes at the local level. you're going to create a normal school, a school for teachers. There's no doubt that his objective is to make sure that the Britishness of Canada is maintained. Again, let's not forget, this is 1840s Canada. The United States is still a threat. We could say that today. But his concern is to make sure that Republican ideas are repulsed. A commitment to civil liberty, to freedom of conscience, to freedom of worship. A commitment to the poor. The equal right and interest of all classes is what he promotes. Education as practical, Christian, comprehensive, again, hand, heart, and head. Click. He has the ambition of using schools to shape a new Canadian mentality, a new Canadian humanity. The discipline, this is again, a leading churchman saying this. The discipline of the church does not authorize us to become the judge of another man's political opinions. The church is not a political association. Egerton Ryerson did not like politics. It has to be said. He didn't like the idea of political parties, and of course he's completely naive. But he wanted unity. If you're going to have division, keep it behind closed doors. Let's have unity as a society. It's naive. Of course it's naive. But he has the right to his opinions. And in his mind, you have to avoid overt division. His objective, to impart to the public mind the greatest amount of useful knowledge based upon and interwoven throughout with sound Christian principles, but to render the educational system the indirect but powerful instrument of British constitutional government. His ambitions are clear. He's not hiding it. He wants a better society, one based on harmony, on common values, and the instrument to do that is the school. Click. One of the things that makes Egerton Ryerson such a powerful humanist is his dedication to public libraries. There are no public libraries. There are a few private libraries, mechanics institutes, things like that. Now, Ryerson says we need schools to have libraries. They need to be supplied with books. The province will supply them with books. And those books need to be freely available to everyone. You don't have to be a school member to borrow the books. Anybody can borrow a book. A book is knowledge. It should be freely available. Out of nothing, Egerton Ryerson pushes, and this is acknowledged by historians, not me. None of what I'm telling you today is drawn from primary sources. This is all drawn from published sources. Public libraries are necessary to improve the tastes and feelings. Coming back to that, improve the taste, elevating and enlarging the views and prompting to varied and useful enterprise that would flow from the introduction of such a fountain of knowledge and enjoyment in each township in Upper Canada. He wants libraries. Click. He doesn't just talk about it. He starts to record. I want to know how many libraries there are. Now that you're setting them up, I want to know how many books you've got. I want to know the statistics. I mean, again, a public servant way ahead of his time. We want data. And he starts to report the statistics as early as 1847 in the journal that he creates to motivate educational thinking in the province, the Journal of Education for Upper Canada. Again, that ability to undertake, that entrepreneurial zeal that he has is applied to everything he does. We need to think about education. Let's create a journal to promote educational reform, to talk about how we teach, to get information, to supply ideas to teachers across the province. And sure enough, as you can see, we already have, by 1850, 70 common school libraries, 77 public libraries on top of that, and 528 Sunday school libraries. Lauren Bruce, the author of Free Books for All, says that it was not until the Reverend Egerton Ryerson became chief superintendent in 1844 that strong administrative support for a tax-supported system of public libraries throughout the colony came into Providence. If you treasure anything at all about our province, it has to be our formidable system of public libraries. It is a remarkable gift, and we owe it to Egerton Ryerson. Click. Lefroy, I come back to our friend Captain Lefroy, because he had a great influence. Lefroy, as I said, is very much interested in the magnetic physics of the planet. He's also deeply interested in meteorology. And he convinces Egerton Ryerson to create in each school little stations to monitor the weather, to register what's happening with the climate. He equips schools with thermometers, with barometers, with equipment necessary, paper and pencils to record the weather, and to supply that data to the province. Citizen science. Citizen science, 1850, Upper Canada. That is humanism. It's geography, but it's really compelling students to apply their observations for the good of society, so that there is a record. Click. He opens the normal school in 1847. It actually becomes a building in 1852. And those students at TMU will notice the facade. It's inside the quad. That's still there. And he launched the Journal of Education of Upper Canada. Click. Which puts the recommendation, the infamous recommendations Egerton Ryerson formulated on the education of Indigenous people into context. At the very same time as the normal school is being launched, the journal is being launched, Egerton Ryerson is asked by the government to give some thinking to what could be done to educate Indigenous kids in the arts of agriculture. Ryerson thinks about it for a couple of weeks. He's been to Europe. The ideas of Europe are still fresh in his mind. And he writes a letter. He writes a letter to the government saying, look, this is a federal jurisdiction. It's not my thing. I don't do Indigenous education. But these are my thoughts since you ask. And he remembers visiting in Switzerland the Hofwill Institute. It's a school, an industrial school, designed to educate Swiss farmers. And the logic there is that you bring students together, they will live in residence, and they will live the farmer's life. Don't forget, Egerton Ryerson is a farmer. His father was a farmer, he's a farmer, he was a farmer first and foremost. This is what we need. If you guys are asking me, how best could we train Indigenous kids about being farmers, the example of the Hofwill School in Switzerland strikes me as a great idea. Not a British school, I'm just saying. It's not a British school. It's not a German school. It's not a French school. It's not a colonialist school. It's a very Republican Swiss example that he comes up with. He says, this is going to be a good thing. You can make attendance voluntary. Kids go for 4 to 8 years, he figures. There's going to be a Christian context, of course. Again, we're thinking 1840 here. Everybody is a Christian missionary. It's a combination of manual work and theory. Again, head, heart, and hands. There's going to be education in the theory of farming, in the theory of mechanics, in the theory of anything related to how to run a farm. His approach is comprehensive. He wants things to be complete. And that'll be it. That'll be it. He will have no more involvement in Indigenous education. But I simply want to note again, the degree to which Egerton Ryerson thought about agriculture. In 1870, he actually writes a book, First Lessons on Agriculture for Canadian Farmers and Their Families. It's in his mind. It's never lost. What a humanist this is. A guy who reads Latin, who reads Greek, who's thinking about farming, who's got a tremendous culture, who's hunting in Europe for the best props in which to teach people, to teach kids. Click. There is a great virtue in having educated farmers. Again, this is 1840s. Farmers don't send their kids to school. Most people don't think that there is an education to be had in farming. You farm the way your dad farmed. That's how you farm. He's saying, no, there's a great deal more. There's a great deal more to this. Every school should be teaching also the essence of farming. Industrial schools are to be taught agriculture. Pupils in industrial schools are to be taught agriculture, kitchen gardening, mechanics. So far as mechanics is connected with making and repairing the most useful agricultural implements, it is therefore necessary that the pupils should reside together, hence the necessity of providing for their domestic education and for every part of their religious instruction. For him, it's all a comprehensive whole. Make the human better, make him a better farmer. Click. What is it that he wants to be taught? Well, look at the list. He actually lays it out in his letter to the government. English language, arithmetic, elementary geometry, or knowledge of forms, geography, elements of general history, natural history, agricultural chemistry, writing, drawing and vocal music. That comes back. Bookkeeping, religion and morals. Notice that religion and morals comes last. The instruction during the summer should, I think, be connected with the agricultural employment of the pupils, including exercises in reading and vocal music, natural history of the plants, vegetables, trees, birds, animals of the country in the first place, together with its geography and history, bookkeeping, and farmers' accounts. How can you find fault with that? Click. He didn't meet Fellenberg. Fellenberg was the founder of the school at Hofwil. But he had a very high regard. He said, I visited that establishment in the autumn of 1845 and found it the bel ideal of what I should wish our Indian industrial schools to be. Click. He knew there would be tremendous opposition. He knows the racism of Canada West's inhabitants. He's not a fool. And George Varden, the British Assistant Superintendent General of Indian Affairs, writes to him, you are aware that there are numerous persons in this colony, though actuated by different motives, who will alike rejoice in the failure of a plan which tends to place the Indian on a footing of perfect equality with their white brethren. They will rejoice in the failure of any plan. They know this idea is not popular. Ryerson is saying the model for Indigenous education should be the acme of education. And that example is Switzerland, and that's what we should be applying. You've asked for my opinion, he says, here it is. Click. Was it a new idea? Not really. We did have in Ontario the Mohawk Institute. Started out as the Mohawk Mechanics Institute in 1829 in Brantford. It had a focus on farming, on gardening, on English. Nowhere near the curriculum envisaged by Egerton Ryerson, a very simple curriculum. But it existed, and since 1834, it had been a residential school. So to accuse Egerton Ryerson of coming up with the notion of residential schools is flat wrong. It's flat misinformed. Click. Ryerson's been accused of being neglectful of black students in the province. And there's no doubt that compared to the civil rights movements of the 1950s in Ontario and later in the United States, that there is nowhere near the entrepreneurship for reform in this regard in Ryerson's actions. That being said, he did speak about it. He was approached as he was applying the first steps of the education reform of 1846. He was approached by a family, a fellow called Rice, a black man from Amherstburg, just outside of Windsor. and complaining that the kids were not being allowed to go to white schools. And Ryerson writes back saying, this is appalling. The prejudice of caste, however unchristian and absurd, is stronger than the law itself. There's a lot of resistance to what Egerton Ryerson is proposing, but he fights back. And in 1850, he creates a new law and includes a separate school act. And in the separate school act, any group of 5 black families would have the right to approach their school boards and to ask that a school be built for them. The idea of mixing is clearly beyond the mentality of Canada West's population. But Egerton Ryerson says if there's going to be 5 families, they should be allowed to create their own schools, and the state has to pay for it. That is remarkable. That is progressive. The administration of the law should be free from the influences of popular passion, he writes in 1868. This will also, of course, give Catholics the right to their own schools. Catholics constitute 40% of the population. Until that point, they were not allowed to have their own schools. The migration of Irish, of course, has a deep influence on Ryerson, and that law will be passed in 1850. Click. There is no doubt that Egerton Ryerson's policies will attract opposition. People called him all sorts of things, a despot. They called him a Prussian because he was centralizing things too much. He was cutting out the local elites. He was not listening to them and their petty little concerns about their local cultures. He wanted people to be educated. He did not want people to be exempted. The knowledge required for the scientific pursuits of mechanics, agriculture, and commerce must be provided to an extent corresponding with the demand and the exigencies of the country. That's the kind of person he is. Click. Which brings us to 1855. And there he is with his daughter. He negotiated another deal with the government of Canada, the United Province of Canada, and the province willingly decided to pay for his trip in Europe, but not for his daughter. So the daughter's expenses came out of his own pocket. And so he's launched in the pursuit of the objects of tastes. He goes to Paris, he goes to Antwerp, he spends Christmas in Munich in 1855. He makes purchases, he writes, quote, calculated to touch the heart, please the eye, gratify the taste. That's a humanist. He goes to Verona, he goes to Mantua, to Bologna, Firenze, click. And there he meets a couple of artists and one in particular I want to draw your attention to. He buys copies of paintings because that's what you did in those days. There's no internet, there's no image, there's no dictionaries, there's no encyclopedias. If you want to teach a teacher about art, you're going to have it. And so Egerton Ryerson is in competition with the leading school boards of the United States and of Europe to commission copies. And this is one of the most famous ones. He commissioned a Franken's Feast of Belshazzar. And this is a particularly interesting one because you'll notice that it's all sorts of turbaned men trying to acquaint the students of Canada West, the teachers of Canada West, with the fact that some people wear turbans around the world. He meets, click, Antoine Sébastien Falardeau. The guy's 30 years old, barely 30 years old. He's a Québécois, hanging out in Florence. He's an artist. He's actually a really good copyist. And this upper Canadian meets the lower Canadian. I don't know if they spoke in French or in English, but they got along quite well. Click. This is the kind of stuff our friend Falardeau was doing. Raphael, a Mary Magdalene by Titian, a Saint Catherine of Alexandria by Veronese. This is what he's buying. Click. Giovanni Martinelli's The Banquet of Baldassare, calculated to touch the heart, please the eye, and gratify the taste. He says this to Georges-Étienne Cartier. Click. He makes a copy of Van Eyck's Michelangelo. Michelangelo by Giacomo del Conte, and a Van Eyck on the left, a self-portrait by Van Eyck. Click. We know this because the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Québec has acquired about 25 of Falardeau's paintings, of Falardeau's copies of his fakes, because the Musée des Beaux-Arts, the Museum of Fine Arts of Quebec City, considers Falardeau to be a gifted artist. A copyist, yes, but still a gifted artist. And this one, you can actually find them on the internet. I found this one on the internet. It's sold in 2015 for only $2,400. It's a copy. It's a fake. But Falardeau was good at it. Click. He goes to Rome in 1856. He winds up in Paris, and they return home to Toronto that April. The hall, 236 paintings by 144 Dutch, German, Flemish, French, Italian, and Spanish masters. Click. Egerton Ryerson, being the good bureaucrat that he was, blew his budget, spent way too much money. He was reprimanded by the government. The Auditor General went after him. You shouldn't be doing that. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. 2 years later, he's sent back, and he'll come back with a whole series of busts. Because the province wanted that. Why? Click. Because Egerton Ryerson has sold him on the idea of creating an educational museum. The City of Toronto should have a museum to see what humanity has created, to see what the men and women outside of Canada West are producing. A means of social improvement as well as a source of enjoyment to numbers in all parts of Upper Canada. That Museum of Upper Canada will eventually become the Ontario School of Art and Design. We call it OCAD. Click. Is he a humanist? I make my case. Ryerson was a man of the farm, a man of faith and charity, a man of language, a man of letters, a man of education, a man of public affairs. He got into the dirty and campaigned for his educational reforms. When people pushed back in 1848, he got into the countryside and made his arguments. He was a man of science, a man of the arts, a man of man, profoundly interested in his fellow man, and a man of Canada, deeply conscious of the fact that what he was going to contribute, what the educational system was going to contribute, would make for a better country. Click. Today we hear a common line from Ryerson from TMU, a repeated line. I also want to reiterate that the university was very clear that the process of getting rid of the name of Ryerson was not about judging Egerton Ryerson. But then the following sentence follows. This process was about commemoration and in the end having a name that aligns with the values of the institution and the aspirations of the community. So my question is, I'll put my humanist values, the ones of Egerton Ryerson, against pretty well anything else. Who wins? Click. This is the real legacy of Egerton Ryerson. The Christian Guardian is still published today as Broadview Magazine. There's a direct line. Victoria College is now part of U of T. The Toronto Normal School is now part of the University of Toronto. The Ottawa Normal School is part of the University of Ottawa. The School of Art is OCAD-U. The Museum of Education is the ROM. The Ontario Society of Artists, which was also created at Ryerson, in the normal school, became the the seed for the Art Gallery of Ontario. The Superintendency of Education is now the Ministry of Education of Ontario. The school libraries is now the municipal library system of our province. That's the real legacy of Egerton Ryerson. Click. So to conclude, there's a great deal more in Egerton Ryerson than a mere Methodist minister. He was a progressive, a deeply humanist, philosopher, writer. He sought the best practices from abroad. He brought to the schools a focus on science, a perfection for teaching, for the inclusion of arts, for the formation of children in the province that would be open, above all, to new ideas. He was not uncontested. There was always opposition, but he was very successful. Not entirely successful. His whole vision was not entirely realized. He ran out of time. But that mission is part of the Ryerson narrative. Click. To conclude, happy 223rd birthday. It is Ryerson's birthday. Was it yesterday?
Ryerson's birthday was yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yes.
So happy 223rd. Thank you very much for listening. I'm open to your question and, of course, to Ron Stagg's comment. Thank you.
Thank you for an amazing lecture, Patrice. I would like, before we move on to questions, to invite Oskar Hanson to stand up. He is our new treasurer, and make a quick pitch for donations.
We have a basket at the front up there, and we're always looking for money to be able to put on events like this and spread the word. And yeah.
We also have a way to e-transfer. Can you recite it, or is it possibly on the handout? If you didn't get the handout, there are some handouts just with background on Friends of Egerton Ryerson. And there is a basket if people want to make a paper donation that is around. And I would like quickly to ask Gord Henderson to stand up. He did the trial of Egerton Ryerson, started that, which was put on by the Canadian Institute for Historical Education, and a sister organization. John Parker is here for that. And so the YouTube from that, the video from that, is available now on our website. Have a look if you want to see the trial of Egerton Ryerson. Thank you, Gord. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Ron Stagg, Professor Emeritus at GMU, to make a few remarks about Patrice's lecture, and then it will be open to everybody here and by Zoom. There are some refreshments at the back. Anyone desperate for a coffee, I think there's some coffee back there, and there are some goodies to have afterwards so people can congregate and have a chat among ourselves. Over to you, Ron.
Thank you. So, Patrice,
I'm taking notes. I'm not looking at my notes.
I'm going to agree with you and disagree with you at the same time. So, there's no doubt about it. The stress that Egerton Ryerson placed on education made him one of the great figures of the 19th century in Canada. He believed that equal education for everyone was important for the progress of humanity. So that kind of puts him in the liberal school. So black, white, indigenous, disabled, Catholic, Protestant, they'd all get the same education.
Girls.
Well, they're in there too. That's another story entirely. So, in order to do that, he put in this, what we call it, system with a whole set of things to help education. They've already been mentioned, trained teachers, quality Canadian textbooks, A lot of people were using American ones in the regular schools, which were funded by the local community when he started, and they were rather poor quality. And of course, the whole thing of mandatory schooling. This is very important to him because people didn't bother going to school. They could just sort of leave whenever you wanted. So the population was not that well schooled. Beyond that, as has been mentioned, he set up a museum. He brought all the stuff, or he actually sent a lot of it back from Europe so that the public could get additional education. There are a few surviving pieces around. He got tapestries as well as the other things. And he set up a library in the education building for research purposes. That eventually went, most of it, to the legislative library. So he wanted, in a sense, continuing education. This is what's going to make people, I wouldn't say better, but this is going to advance civilization, humankind, and that's where we agree. Now, beyond this, he was a fervent believer in the power of religion. This is why he became a Methodist in his teens. And this is why he became a Methodist minister. He had a really strong belief that moral values and the idea of hard work were taught by religion. Humanism, and I'm paraphrasing it here, you had it up there, says that life is based on reason and on common values, that moral values are based on human nature and experience alone. There is no superior being. And to him, the morals, the sense of what you should do in life came from religion. That famous letter of 1847 talks about the need for indigenous people to have religion, to teach them morality, and to teach them hard work. What most people miss when they read that is, same thing he said about the working class. He said, these people, once they're finished working, they spend their time drinking and sitting around. He believed that without religion, people will slump into vice, into idleness. This was very, very important. It was a big part of his way of looking at things. If you look at the community, his second appointment was, as was mentioned, through the Mississaugas of the Credit to their village. And this was set up by his later really good friend, Peter Jones, and Peter Jones' brother. And this was set up specifically by them to teach the people who settled there, the Mississaugas, farming. There was a church and school, and this is what inspired Ryerson in his thinking in later life. Alcohol was banned. If you had a drink, you'd have to come before the community and make amends, apologize. So what he was trying to do was to, in a sense, recreate this. To give indigenous people and other people a sense of moral duty and a sense that the world worked on hard work. And that's what religion would teach you. So that, to me, is the one aspect of him that you didn't focus on. But that does not take away from the fact that in terms of what he was saying, he was a humanist. It's just that his humanism focused on certain things, but his religion focused on the whole. It overrode his sense of humanism, I guess you'd say.
Thanks, Ron. I think we should let other people into this fairly soon.
Should we let-
Yes. But I think, give Patrice a moment to reply, but then let people here come up with some questions, and then we'll see who wants to ask a question on Zoom.
Thanks, Ron. We don't disagree. I'm emphasizing today the humanism. I see the inescapable religiosity of the man as suffusing, as coloring every aspect of his thought to the point where it practically neutralizes itself. His success was in appealing across religions, across denominations. He's a Methodist, but he has a profound appeal to the Protestants and a very profound appeal to the Catholics. My discovery of Egerton Ryerson, I've shared this with Ron before, happened 25 years ago when I was writing a paper, it became an article, a chapter, on the French-Canadian resistance to Regulation 17. And I'm going through their papers, the Association Canadienne Française de l'Ontario, and what do I see? They're harking back to Egerton Ryerson. They're asking, what happened to our province? What happened to the legacy of Egerton Ryerson that had so much respect for the Catholics? So yes, he's a man of God. He is a reverend. He is a high priest of Methodism. But that's not the whole story. It's not the whole story. So we're having a debate on shades.
Okay. However, let's let people here ask a couple of questions, and then we'll ask people on Zoom. Who would like to? Yes.
Well, my question doesn't relate so much to the points that you addressed today, but to the context that brings us, that brought a lot of us here in the first place. Anyone who listened to what you had to say this evening would think, if I were to start a university and try to come up with an inspiring name to give to it, to give the school something to aspire to, as a sign of what we want to be about and what we want to have at the core of our thinking, and to inspire our students to reach for. I can't think of a more anodyne name than Metropolitan. But I would think the name Ryerson might be a very effective name to use to apply to a university that thought of itself in those terms. So my question is, have the members of the administration of the school that dare not speak its name heard your presentation or any portion of the presentation that you gave us tonight? And have they paid close attention, and why not?
Thanks, John. No, clearly no. When the first report came out, Ron and I collaborated on a long article emphasizing not Egerton Ryerson as a humanist, but we were defending his qualities and defending his importance. There's no denying that Ryerson is one of the most important thinkers of our country's history. I rank him very, very highly. We forgot about Egerton Ryerson. We just forgot. He fell out of fashion. He was extremely fashionable in the late 19th century. The statue that was torn down was paid for by students, not by the state. It was paid for by students and teachers, people who felt a need to say thank you for the normal school. And the statue was built in front of the normal school as a monument to his memory and his contribution. So no, the University of 2020 doesn't think about that kind of stuff. Ryerson is a name that does not radiate outside a very small community. People stopped talking about it. I started at Ryerson in 2006. I attended many convocations. The name Ryerson never came up. It just never came up. Presidents never invoked it. It was never a subject of conversation. So it's been forgotten. It's been forgotten. I think that the mission of this fantastic group is not to restore the name Ryerson to the university. The name of the university has been changed because it needs to sell globally. And Ryerson, notwithstanding my deep affection for the man, is simply not marketable. But our mission is to at least maintain the memory of his contribution so that it doesn't perish. And I think that that can only be done when people like us get together, maybe annually to celebrate his birthday, but that would be the mission.
Yes, the administration doesn't want to hear this. I've been in touch with the person who's responsible for the horrible plaque that's put up saying that Egerton Ryerson was the chief architect of the residential school system. They have said over and over again they're going to take it down, and they just have to talk to a few people. But they really don't care about all of this. They just want it to go away, I think.
Thank you. First question was from John Parker. If people would give their name when asking a question, or feel free to make comments. So we'll have one more here, and then we'll see if the people on Zoom would like to.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Sophie Wallace. We're here with the Eye Opener newspaper. I'm just curious. I have two questions, if that's okay. My first question is, if Ryerson had the scope to impose his the Schools Act, the Segregating Schools Act, if he had that kind of sway in education systems, why do you think he didn't choose to open up the schools to multiple races and genders?
And second question?
And my second question is, so in Ryerson's 1847 report on industrial schools, he talks about civilizing indigenous populations through religion. He had the opportunity to open up indigenous-led institutions, and he purposefully chose not to. And I'm just wondering, with your perception of Ryerson as a humanist who respects and learns the languages of other cultures and believes in equality, why would he not choose to support indigenous people in that way?
Two good questions. Thank you very much. I'll start. You can continue.
Please.
You have to get back into the context of the 1840s. Ryerson, I quoted him a couple of times, said that what's happening is wrong. Racism is wrong. It should not happen. Blacks, indigenous, whites need to be treated equally. That being said, the local trustees had the control over the way money was spent. He had limited control. Again, this is the mid-19th century. Egerton Ryerson's mission is to get people to send their kids to school. 99% of the population is white. Get those kids to school. If there's going to be some collateral damage, he has said racism is wrong. Kids should all be at school. They should be integrated. They should go to school. That's our position as the government of Ontario. But as I said, as I quoted him, local forces sometimes are stronger. At least he legislated. He asked for legislation to be passed because he isn't only a public servant, that at least the money flow in equal amounts on a prorated basis, that the money be spent, that the tax dollars be spent to support Black families in their education. Quite frankly, that was the full limit of his power. In terms of Indigenous schools, you got to remember, it is not a provincial responsibility. The only time he intervened on indigenous schools was that letter of 1847. After that, the government of Canada doesn't ask him. It's not your business. And that's why he never got involved. It was his one instance. And in that one instance, he says powerfully that the kids, the indigenous kids, should be trained by the best standards in the world. You want my advice, he says? It's Hull in Switzerland. He was never asked again. Because it's a federal jurisdiction, he's a provincial public servant. It's as simple as that. Had people listened to him, I think we'd have had a much better history. But that was not to be the case. What's important when you're thinking of an intellectual like that is that he articulated very noble principles that would still be upheld today, I think. I think I'm convinced of it.
With regard to black separate schools, Egerton Ryerson was horrified. I've read the documents. He thought this was disgusting. But in some areas where black settlers had arrived in large numbers, the white settlers demanded that there be separate schools. We don't want them in our schools. So what he suggested to the government was, okay, I can't stop them. They're going to get them. So let's do it this way. Let's let the local area decide. And what that meant was that aside from an area in what's now southwestern Ontario and another area around Hamilton, there were no separate schools, except if black people actually asked for them.
When I wrote the play, which I recommend you watch, those were you raised the two things that I was really uncomfortable with. And so you hit on the 2 points. He wasn't, yay, let's get, but the black, I think, Ron, you said it perfectly. He limited the amount of black, racially segregated schools. And the word civilizing, I thought, that's horrifying. He does say that in that letter. But then he would have said religion was civilizing for everyone. It's a case of using the word, and now it seems evil. So, but he didn't necessarily mean it that way. He meant religion was a civilizing practice for society. But you're right. Those are the 2 points where it's a little uncomfortable. But we're in a whole different area, a whole different time frame right now.
If I could just add my 2 bits to it. There were a few places where if there were not a black segregated school, there would have been no school whatsoever. And Ryerson insisted that the teachers be paid equally, which did not happen in residential schools routinely. And this is very clear in a knock on the door put out by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that teachers in residential schools were routinely paid less. So Ryerson did make a difference, even though he was himself limited. So, Austin, do we have people that we can hear from? Okay, then, yes, sorry, and then let's get some questions by Zoom. Sorry, Brian.
Regarding the Indigenous aspect, Ryerson, as superintendent of education, did not have authority over Indigenous schools. That was the department, the Indian department, which was a British department. So he couldn't have done anything about that. When they asked him, he replied. And he tried to suggest something that would give Indigenous people the opportunity to learn what Euro-Canadians learned, to put them on the same level. This was the thing. So that issue you raised of him saying they were uncivilized, this is one thing that's used against him now. That meant something totally different then than it does now. It simply meant they hadn't reached the same level of development as the other settlers. And if they were going to survive as a culture, they needed to be civilized. This comes from Scottish philosophers. There were 3 stages of development, which corresponded to hunter-gatherer,
Herding,
it
herding and agriculture.
hunter-gatherer, and then semi-nomadic, and then civilized. So this was actually in popular culture. So he wasn't saying what we would think it meant. They're uncivilized. He was saying they haven't yet reached the same level. If they're going to survive, you saw they're only less than 1% of the population. If they're going to survive, they need to learn to do the same things Europeans do.
I do have a remark about civilization. The more and more I read about mid-19th century rhetoric, the more I see civilization as a concept as a synonym for what we call today the mainstream. The vast majority were in civilization. My favorite French Canadians would articulate that it would be nice for English Canada to learn civilization. It's a bit of a condemnation of English Canada, but that's what it meant. You know, you should be a little bit more like us, civilized. It's about joining the mainstream. It's not at all, in that sense, it's not a condemnation. It's not a racist condemnation. It's simply an invitation to join the mainstream and to use education as a way of greasing the rails so that that transition to the mainstream could be facilitated. That's the way it was meant. That's the way people like John A. McDonald meant it. To join civilization was to join the mainstream, to participate in the economy, to make money. John A. McDonald, I'm going to drift for 1 second, but made the argument the indigenous people should have the right to vote so that they can have a say in civilization. They should have the means necessary in democracy, in the economy, to join civilization, to join the mainstream.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Oh, certainly there'll be a chance to talk informally afterwards, and there are some refreshments at the back. And that is up the stairs at the back. But any other questions or comments here?
When I hear the description of what Ryerson was encouraging as far as nurturing the hand, heart, and mind, and living in an environment where skills are learned as well as book learning and all of that sort of thing, sounds to me a lot like what was going on at the Tuskegee Institute about 40 years later in Alabama. And I'm just wondering, am I making that up, or is there a direct connection that can be drawn between the two? And if there is it just a coincidence, or did one group learn from the other?
I can't answer specifically about the Tuskegee Institute, but Peter Jones, otherwise known as Sacred Feathers, yes, that too. I guess. He had studied schools in the United States, residential schools, and he thought this is the way to go. And he pushed Ryerson and he pushed other people to get them. Now this is before they became something very different. The Mohawk Institute, for instance, the first of the English residential schools here, was really highly regarded and was set up. People had to actually apply and compete to get in. So these were seen as a good thing. So they were actually copying, in a sense, what was going on in the United States. What happened later, I can't comment on.
If you're drawing, John, the parallel between Booker Washington and his vision of a practical education, as in the Tuskegee Institute, there are parallels there. And there was a quasi-universal movement of mixing practical education with theoretical education. It's not just Ryerson. Ryerson is part of an international movement. Pestalozzi, all the other guys that he visits, they're all about that. Practical, tying the practical with the theoretical. Make it interesting for students. Use the blackboard, use song, use music. Make education fruitful. Make education the seeds of further development, not an end in itself, but the beginnings of something.
Online from Robin Collins. So he's asking, could Patrice speak a little bit about the conditions of indigenous people in the time of Ryerson, including threats to their livelihood in Upper Canada?
Absolutely, and Ron can certainly speak to that. The situation is terrible, absolutely terrible. There is a summit meeting in 1846. This is what prompts the whole event. The leading chiefs of Ontario gathered together. It was called Narrows.
Was that the Narrows?
The Narrows, Lake
Orillia.
in Orillia, at the Narrows in Orillia. And they got together and they had a discussion about their difficulties, the difficulties of their community. The farming methods were no longer providing enough food. The Western modes of transportation were developing rapidly. We're talking roads at this point. We're not talking railroads yet. This is 6 years before the railroad. But there is more and more competition for food. There's more and more food on the market, and the indigenous cannot supply. They cannot make their money. They don't produce enough to make money. They're in competition with farms that are developing rapidly across Ontario. So the situation among the indigenous is dire. And they're looking for new solutions. And they know the solution is education. So they gather this insight, they turn to Varden. Varden says, the only person I know who can really speak to educational reform is this guy Ryerson. I'm going to write to him. And he does, and he gets his answer. But the situation is a terrible situation. And it was born out of desperation.
The other aspect here is that Indigenous society at the time was still a hunter-gatherer society. And the land was being settled. It was very, very hard to carry on the traditional way of life. You had to do something. And a lot of Indigenous people had basically given up, and they sat around and drank. This is what the settlement at the Credit was designed to get away from. And this is what Ryerson was trying to do, that he believed religion would teach people morality, and that included getting away from alcohol and working hard.
Well, once again, thank you both for very interesting and enlightening presentations. I'm glad you both agree finally that he is indeed Ryerson, a humanist. I was thinking that last night I happened to hear a presentation on the educational system in Europe and the different strains that the countries that Ryerson visited have today. And there was someone who actually teaches at Ryerson, Michael Bardecchia, I believe, was saying, well, really, it's Ryerson that brought back so much of the methods that the Europeans were using and implemented them here in Ontario. So that was a point of enlightenment. But, you know, it was also pointed out that this group really does provide education to the public or probably universities and school system. I happen to have a doctorate from in education from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. But I've learned more about Ryerson, Egerton Ryerson, as the founder of education in this province since I've joined this group than I certainly ever learned in the process of acquiring 2 graduate degrees there. So that needs to change too, I think. So again, thank you very much.
One last thing. Ryerson's ideas were used in other parts of, his ideas of education were used in other parts of Canada as it developed. So he wasn't just influencing Ontario. And some of his ideas were actually used in other countries.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.